All right, before we continue with lesson 1 for this quarter, we'll go through the 17 time periods again, no quiz. We'll just go through them together. So, before the flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the Exodus, the wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, the judges, the united kingdom, the divided kingdom, Judah alone, the captivity, return from captivity, the years of silence, the life of Christ, the early church, letters to the Christians. All right, and as I mentioned last week, this is the time period of the United Kingdom and scriptures that will be going along with that. So discussing Saul, 1 Samuel really 8 through 31, and also 1 Chronicles chapter 10. It's the only spot in Chronicles that mentions Saul, and then David, the book of 2 Samuel, and then 1 Chronicles chapters 11 through 29, and then when we get to Solomon, 1 Kings 1 through 11, and then 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. So we finished up with question number 1. So question number 2, what's the significance of Saul's background and him being selected by God to be king? Clarissa?
Well, he was from the smallest tribe, Benjamin, and he wasn't even from a significant family of that small tribe. So there wasn't really much significance in his background. So he probably came out of nowhere to a lot of people. But God chose him to be his prince, to be under God's rule, and it was God who anointed him.
All right. So at the end of Bible class, either last Sunday or Wednesday night, I don't remember now, Nate come up to me, and of course Nate's teaching downstairs, and he at least looks at my questions, and he was like, so what are you getting at with what's the significance of Saul's background? He asked me the same question about one of the Ruth questions that I had too. So to me, one of the main things that I get out of this comes from a story that we actually didn't talk about in the book of Judges. So if you go back to Judges, chapters 19, 20, and 21, for those that we didn't study it, but for those that know their Bible, what happened in Judges chapter 19?
There was a priest, and he had a wife, and when he was going through the land of the tribe of Benjamin, that wife was violated, and when he saw that she was dead, he cut her to pieces and had other send those pieces to other tribes to get them to come and kill the Benjamites.
Yeah, it's very, very eerily similar to Sodom. And so this Levite had a concubine that had actually left him. He went to retrieve her. And when he does retrieve her on their way back, as Lena said, they stop off to stay the night in Benjamin, specifically in Gibeah. And there were worthless men that wanted to have relations with the men. And the house owner was willing to give up a virgin and the concubine. And so the ladies were sent, they were raped. And when this Levite woke up the next morning and walked out, she's actually on the doorstep and she's dead. So when he gets back to his house, he cuts her up into pieces, sends her throughout all of Israel. And then what happens in chapter 20? All right, so you've got everybody else in Israel go to war with the tribe of Benjamin. And what's the outcome of that?
So decimated, they almost ceased to exist.
Yeah. They were down to 600 men in the whole tribe of Benjamin. So chapter 21 is actually, I don't know, you might call it the restoration of Benjamin. There's some kind of shady stuff going on that they to get wives back for these men. But at this point, the tribe of Benjamin was almost completely decimated. So while Saul is this person that stands, a head above everyone else and looks like this amazing strapping young man, he is mentioned specifically from Gibeah, where this took place. And so he is from this tribe that was almost totally annihilated and extinct. And so he is, yes, as Clarissa mentioned, from the tribe of Benjamin, but he is specifically mentioned from Gibeah. And so it almost didn't happen. And that's where Saul's coming from. Norm?
Yeah, it seemed to me like it was God putting as much space between what God wanted and what the people wanted, and he was going to he was making a big deal out of picking the tribe that was the most vile, the least, the ones that, I mean, and your king's going to come from there. You want a king, he's going to come from there. And then that's going to be so different from the one after that he really, really wants later on.
Yeah, and to me, another thing of significance is just comparing Saul to Jesus, because there in 1 Samuel it talks about how Saul was more handsome than anyone among the sons of Israel, and his shoulders and up he was taller than any of the people. So again, he had the look of a king. But then what do we read about Jesus over in Isaiah 53 verse 2? It says, "For he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him." And so it's the exact opposite of what we read about Saul. So I think that's interesting too. But to me, the biggest thing was the fact that he comes from Gibeah, where there almost were no more Benjamites left after that situation. All right, anything else on number 2? Number 3, what do we learn from the events leading up to Saul being chosen as king? For example, the lost donkeys, etc. And what do these passages teach us about how God's plans are often fulfilled? Ms. Francis?
The servant suggested that they go see the seer, which was Samuel. Samuel was already told beforehand that he would see Saul the next day, and then Samuel told Saul that he was appointing him a commander over God's people.
Okay. Lena?
Well, I answered to this that God has a plan for everything, and sometimes we think of things being a misfortune to us, but they are actually part of God's plan.
All right. Norm?
Demonstrating God's control, complete control of this entire situation.
Yeah, to me, it's reminiscent of what we just talked about last week with Ruth. And these aren't miraculous events. Donkeys going missing and then Saul and his servant going looking for them. It's not something that is miraculous, just natural circumstances that are taking place, human decisions that are involved that are all leading to this moment. But we know that God's timing is perfect. And the timing of Saul's encounter with Samuel, it was something that God precisely orchestrated. And he had told Samuel, God had told Samuel about it. And so, regardless of who's involved or what's involved, whether it's Saul and his helper or the donkeys, like it's all leading to this moment in time, because God's purpose is going to be fulfilled. And as we mentioned, even with Ruth, it can be fulfilled just with ordinary events, but it is going to be fulfilled. Anything else on number 3? Norm?
It gives us an idea of the principle that God used, Old Testament, New Testament, around through, that how could you tell if somebody was, a prophet of God? If what they said came true. Here's an exact example of how short that time frame could be. Literally, go there now and you will find these people there. You saw Jesus using this also. Go to there, you'll find 2 donkeys, talk to the guy who's in the upper room, and again, God's plan in action, as he said, another good example.
Yeah. Question number 4. In 1 Samuel 9 through 11, we see Saul's character traits revealed through his initial selection all the way to his response to the Ammonites in chapter 11. What different character traits of Saul are revealed, and what can we learn about Saul from this, and what application can we make? So what do we learn here about Saul in the initial phases of being introduced to him and him becoming king? April?
See a humility with like what Thurston was talking about, coming from the smallest tribe, a control of spirit when spoken against in 10:27, and he doesn't retaliate, and as we read in 11:13.
Okay, so there's this humility that we see in the very beginning, and this is something that we know is in fact true because Samuel calls back to this in our lesson that hopefully we'll get to. But in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 17, Samuel said, "Is it not true that though you were little in your own eyes, you were made the head of the tribes of Israel?" So Samuel's acknowledging, remember the way that you were and how little you were in your own eyes. Just the humility that he had coming from the smallest tribe, his clan being the least in the tribe of Benjamin. And so you almost have this sense of Moses too, where, who am I to be king, because he thinks he's a nobody and it doesn't make any sense. And then as April was talking about there in the end, after the war with the Ammonites, of course, after he was made king, there were those that didn't like him being king. And so after this great victory, people were like, well, where are these guys at? Let's deal with them. And Saul's like, no, we're not going to. He's not going to seek revenge. So I think that there's a sense of compassion is probably not the right word, but it's good leadership in that situation, not seeking retribution or his own revenge. Norm?
It shows what lack of faith in God, how that is personified within the character of Saul, because he was one of these that it was all about, did I get a good result? Okay, now I'm ready to go. Or I'm provoked, I'm angry, and stuff. It was always physical. It was always temporary. It was always about what was going on right now, and it just the opposite of what we're going to see again later on from a man after God's own heart.
And another thing that we see in the beginning of Saul's life is obedience. He's following the commands that are given him through Samuel. And another thing that we see is, even though he was humble and had this sense of reluctance in the beginning, whenever he is confronted with this situation here in chapter 11, I think that we see a very decisive person, and he was not wavering in what needed to be done. And so I think that there's even just a transition between, I don't really think that I'm fit for this, but then now that he's king and he knows it through God, he is very decisive in making sure that he is going to take care of that situation. What do you make of the situation of him hiding in the baggage? What character trait would you say that is?
Self-sufficient. He was looking out for himself.
Okay. Timid?
Fear.
What'd you say, Ken?
Fear.
Fear?
Fear of being made king.
Daddy?
April mentioned it, but the humility. He's still thinking, where he's from, his background, and all that, and the fact that he from his early, what we're reading about here, he was probably saying, "I'm not worthy of this."
Yeah. Todd?
It kind of reminds me of the fool in Proverbs. Every young man is that simple, naive one, And so there's humility when you're young and simple and he doesn't know things. So you see that humility in him when he's young. But then he despises instruction through his life, and so he never becomes wise. So that's the definition of a fool. He seems to personify that.
It's interesting to me, and just to be honest with you, I'm not sure what to make of it, because we see him at this point. He's hiding in the baggage, and then all the way through our next lesson there in chapter 13 and also chapter 15, just the way that he acted. It's definitely interesting, for sure. But he definitely did have a sense of humility in the beginning. And one of the things that I think that we learn from the way that he handled the situation after the victory of the Ammonites, I think that there is a sense of forgiveness, even though maybe there wasn't anything that was asked. He's like, I'm not going to seek this revenge, but he wanted everybody to be unified at that point. And I think that's a good character trait. So speaking of those, how do Saul's actions in chapters 9 through 11 reflect both positive and negative leadership qualities? And I specifically asked this in this situation because I knew what was coming up in the next lesson. So what's some positive leadership qualities that we see?
When there were only 7 days offered to solve the situation with Ammonites, he immediately cut up the oxen and sent messages to all the tribes to gather the people.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you like to see or would want to see in a leader, is not somebody that's sitting there wavering or not really knowing what to do. And so inaction ends up leading to a lot of problems. And so, yeah, being decisive. He wasn't divisive yet. What else? Norm?
It's interesting that the way Samuel put his instructions to Saul about, once you have done this and God is with you, then you do what you want at that point. Do what seems appropriate to you. And the thing that always seemed appropriate to him was not go to God to ask what to do, but to rely on his own resources. And so his obedience was, when God was with him, that worked out well for him. But his first inclination was never to go to God and in humility and say, I just don't know what to do. He would always rely on his own thinking on that, and that was always dangerous.
So what did it take on his part to be confronted with this situation with the Ammonites, to act the way that he did? So he got the Spirit of God, but even though in the beginning we see him as this humble, reluctant person, I think that here he did have the Spirit of God, but there's a sense of courage that he has to have, and knowing that this is going to be okay. Of course, he ends up giving all the credit to the Lord after it's all said and done in verse 14 of chapter 11. Then Samuel said to the people, come and... No, that's not right. Verse 13, not 14. But Saul said, not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished deliverance in Israel. And so I think that's another positive quality that we have at this point. He's acknowledging God as the one that is behind all of this, something that you would hope that he would continue to have throughout his reign, but we know that he doesn't. What about negative leadership qualities that maybe you see just here in the beginning? Norm?
Get the hint of a problem for later on. It's going to show itself over and over again, and that is anger. We saw the humble, timid person before, and now when he learns of the situation, his response is anger, and I would say righteous anger at this point. He's getting angry for the right reason, but he's got a temper, And we're gonna see it later on out of control, and that's gonna be a negative for him.
Okay. So I've listed several things, but then I put future. I mean, I don't see in the very beginning there's a whole lot of what I can pinpoint as negative. And so I think that, again, one of the reasons I'm asking the question is because I know where we're going, and you know where we're going with the story of Saul. So I don't see a whole lot of necessarily negative leadership qualities. Anything else on number 5? Todd?
Just Clarissa.
Go ahead, Clarissa.
I mean, I just think he is humble. He is reluctant at first to wear the crown and lead the people. And then he does, we see here, have to step up and does step up in a major way. But when you then take on that role and the people are then behind him, that leads to, okay, I can do this. And, so he may have just gotten the feel of power and the success that he had early on, which then ultimately led to his downfall. Because then he started relying more on that than how he began. And so that's just something that everyone has to be cautious of. Success is good, but you need to always remember where the success comes from.
All right. Daddy?
We talked about how humble he was and all of that, but he'd been told by Samuel that he's going to be a king. Well, what did he do? Went off to taking care of the herds again. So really he didn't step up there, even being told what he was going to be doing. So he kind of didn't take on any responsibility then. And then what's he doing in 1 Samuel 11? Verse 5, he says, "Now there was Saul coming behind the herd from the field." And then he sees the people all upset. And then he says, "What's going on here?" Well, that's when the Holy Spirit came upon him, and that's when he got angry. And so we'll read later on what happened with the Spirit because of his life. But right now, he didn't take on those leadership skills, it doesn't look like, until the Spirit of God came on him and filled him there. So I don't think he had very good leadership skills there at the beginning.
Anything else on Ken?
It seems to me like he went through quite a learning curve, He had never been king. He didn't know what it meant to be a king, I suppose. And, once he had learned that he was going to be a king, okay, well, what does that mean? I'm going to go out to the field and do what I normally do. And maybe it'll eventually come to me, or somebody will tell me what I need to do,
All right, let's move on to question number 6. What can we learn about the tension between human insecurity and having to find strength to fulfill God's purpose? Is anybody ever scared to do something that you need to do? Clarissa?
I mean, sometimes we obviously need to go to other Christians or those that maybe have done or been through a similar thing. And then sometimes we just have to force ourselves. We just have to make ourselves do it. Otherwise, you might not.
So Clarissa wasn't in the class last quarter, so I didn't get She was teaching the smaller class. She didn't look at my questions, but this time she's looking at my questions because she's in the class, and so this is one that we actually talked about. Norm?
The tension between a human being insecure and finding the strength to fulfill God's purpose, that tension is real. And it can destroy you. And I think that's the lesson of Saul, because that's what happened to him. He let that tension destroy what he could have been. And we are in the same position today if we are not careful.
Yeah, this is, as Norm said, this is something that is very real, and I would think that you are not human if you have never experienced this, because there are times in our lives as Christians where we're presented with things that are not easy to do, and for reasons that maybe we have the same thought as Saul, as, well, I don't feel like I'm qualified to do this. I'm not for sure how, I'm supposed to go about this. And what we can let happen is we let that overcome us to where then we are just inactive, where we don't do anything. And that's obviously the wrong thing to do. And so we've got to find obedience in the face of doubt and be able to rely on the strength that God supplies to overcome the insecurities that we may have in ourselves. And I think, what's the major cause of that when we have these doubts? Oftentimes it's a lack of faith, because we are just like Moses and just like Saul. We're looking at ourselves in a vacuum, and we think, okay, I can't do this. We don't have the spirit of Jonathan, where what we'll see in the next lesson, obviously, Jonathan was like, I don't care how many we got God. And that's the mindset that we need to have, regardless of what the situation is. We've got God. Over in Isaiah 41 verse 10, it says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Surely I will help you. Surely I will uphold you, and with my righteous right hand." And I think most of us probably could quote Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And so that's where our strength is supposed to come from. And so we can't let our own insecurities keep us from doing what we know needs to be done. Daddy?
I think the other thing that causes problems is our impatience. We say we have faith in God, but when things don't happen or get better, in the time frame that we think it ought to, then that's when we start having problems. And we have the same situation in our next lesson with Saul, about the offerings or the sacrifices and stuff,
Yeah. Definitely. Anything else on number 6? Question number 7. When Saul is publicly revealed as king, some people question his suitability while others accept him. What can we learn from Saul's initial humility and how the people responded to God's choice? And how should we respond when a qualified man is appointed to leadership, even if they seem unlikely to us? And let me just ask, why do you think I'd be asking this question right now? You got that one figured out, didn't you, Ken? All right, so obviously we're in the process of appointing deacons, so something that's on my mind, hopefully it's on your mind too. So what do we take from this, from Saul, and how he is accepted or not accepted, and how he handles the situation? So we've talked about his initial humility, but go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, we may not always be happy with the person who is put in charge, or whatever the case may be, but if they meet the qualifications, then we should support them. And there were people who were not happy with Saul being placed in charge. They didn't think he was qualified, but those people learned better later on. So.
Yeah, I think that the people's response really, it does highlight that God's choice may not always align with our own expectations or our own judgments. And so something that we have to be mindful of. What else? Lena?
I'll just respond to the Saul's question. You cannot please everybody. There will always be people that are unhappy because we all view things differently. And well, in this case, you don't go even with majority rule or not. You go with God's choice.
Yes, that's a really good point. At no point is it majority rule. It's God's rule in all situations. Norm, did you have your hand up? I saw Todd. Go ahead, Todd.
I'm thinking about it more from Saul's perspective. He's going to find out that he doesn't always have the support of the people, And that just drives him nuts, right, later on when they start chanting about David killing more than he kills and all that. And the reality is you're not always going to have the support you wish you had when you're in an appointed position. And your focus needs to be on doing what's right and serving God rather than how can I gain more support. Because this is just reality. Yes, we should all learn as a people to support God's chosen leaders, but it's not always going to be the case.
Yeah, it's really twofold. Kind of the question and even the situation with Saul. You've got, just thinking about it from our perspective, you've got someone that may be appointed as an elder or a deacon, and they know that they may not have the 100 support of everybody. How do you act in that situation? Kind of like Todd was talking about. But then the reverse of that is, how should the group respond, or how should you personally respond if a qualified man is appointed, but it's not somebody that you agreed with? How should you respond in that situation? Francis?
Everybody unite for the cause, and if the reasoning that this person was selected has been met, then do all you can to help it work.
Right, and that should be the right attitude. You have to recognize that you can't just dismiss someone based on their appearance or their background or maybe your perceived biases or even inadequacies. If they meet the qualifications, see, and oftentimes we want to look at the qualifications and we try to impose our own thoughts on, well, I don't maybe necessarily like this person, so then I got to try to find a qualification maybe they don't meet, and we try to work around it that way. And so we have to guard against our own pride in those situations and recognize that if a man is qualified, then we need to, and they're appointed, then we need to support them. We should pray for them and do what we can to help them regardless of our own feelings. Norm?
Because people absolutely asked for this. And so when God gave them exactly what they asked for, lo and behold, no surprise to anybody, people complain. And we're no different today. In any large group, any small group, not everybody's going to be satisfied. And it's highlighted for this, and that the people asked God, we want a king, and God said, here it is. And they were like, we don't have one. But you got what you asked for. And when you get to the qualifications, like, it doesn't seem likely, but God apparently believes that he can fulfill this role. And honestly, if somebody is appointed to a position that is qualified, and you have some misgivings or things about, like, things that don't work, then you need to work with them actually to make them better in those areas you think they're short. Because if you know where they're short, and that's where your beef is, then be the brother that lifts them up.
And going back to one of the things that Lena said about this being God's plan, I think I'm more looking at it from the perspective of somebody that is qualified, that is appointed, that you may have some issue with, but the opposite of that is also true, and it's got to be men that are qualified, not just somebody that we like, somebody that may be our friend, and so we want to put them in this position, so we have to guard against that as well. Anything else on number 7? Question number 8, what's the significance of the timing of Nahash's threat, how the people of Jabesh Gilead initially responded to the threat of Nahash, and the response of Saul and the rest of Israel? So we've talked about this a little bit with some of the questions, but what do you think is the significance of the timing here of his threat? Ken?
I think it was a challenge to the new king, King Saul.
Okay. I think that if you actually look just through 1 Samuel, I think that God does this, or he has done this already, where he's testing either individuals or testing the people. And And I think that Samuel, when he calls the people to repent, and they do, well, what happens next? Anybody remember? The Philistines ended up attacking them, and I think it's a test. So you've repented, now you're being put to the test. Now the people of Israel, they have their king. As Norm pointed out, this is what they asked for, and so now they're going to be attacked and they're going to be tested. And so how did they do initially?
Looks like they are not recognizing Saul as king, the people of Jabesh Gilead. They are ready to give up, and they are telling this Nahash, well, we'll come out to you in 7 days if we can find somebody to protect us.
And what was the agreement going to be?
Out their eyes.
Okay, so their right eye is going to be gouged out. And they're to the point, well, if we can't find anybody to help us in 7 days, we'll agree to that. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me that the situation that they are so soon having an earthly king overseeing them, but they also have another king, and yet they're just to the point of, okay, well, we're going to see if we can find some help, but if we can't, yes, I mean, we'll do that. I mean, it's again, and Jesse Jackson talked about this in his invitation, and we've talked about it multiple times here. We can look back at these situations and think, man, what were they thinking? But oftentimes we do the same thing. But it's crazy that they're not immediately going to God for help. I mean, that should be first and foremost. But then, like Lena said, I mean, I don't know if it's just so new, but this is what they've asked for. But they're not actually reaching out and saying, going to the king, like immediately, and saying, all right, here, we got something going on here. We need some help. So very bad initial response. And then what about the response of Saul and then the rest of Israel? What did Saul do?
The yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all of Israel with the message, whoever does not come to follow Saul and Samuel will have this slaughter like this. So
Kind of reminiscent of Judges chapter 20, Judges 19 and 20. And then what was the response of the people? 330,000 people showed up. I mean, it's amazing to me. Of course, as my dad pointed out, Saul's response is empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, and so he has this righteous anger in this situation, and he's able to bring Israel together. And obviously, after this, there is an enormous amount of confidence in Saul. I mean, literally just in no time, he's presented with this situation, and he's got 330,000 men showing up to fight. And so you know that there's this sense of loyalty now after this victory that had happened. But again, thankfully, Saul gave credit to the Lord. Todd?
And one explanation might be, during the period of the judges, some of those judges overlap. Nathan was showing me the timeline and how Samson might be down on the coast delivering the people, and Deborah and Barak are in another region. And so Jabesh Gilead, anything that ends with Gilead is on the other side of the Jordan. And so maybe they're not believing that anybody on the other side is ever going to come to help. But it shows that transition where, by sending out the pieces of the oxen to all the tribes, like we're a unified country now. We help anybody within the country.
Yes. Norm, can you ring the bell, please? All right, last question. After the victory, Saul refuses to let anyone be punished for previously questioning his leadership. What can we learn from Saul's example regarding forgiveness and maintaining unity in the body of Christ? And how does this principle apply to resolving conflicts within our church communities today? So just trying to hone in on what we can learn from this. Francis?
Have God's will is for the brethren to be one. We should do the will of God. We should love our brother and forgive.
Okay. So, yes, I think that there is this sense of unity that Saul is concerned about. And I think that you know, in this situation, obviously you've got initially people on opposite sides of the fence, some that are for Saul, some that are against Saul. And the truth is, even within the church, we're going to have conflicts that arise. We're going to have disagreements that come up. It's just inevitable. It's going to happen. And so I think that one of the things that we have to recognize, one, is forgiveness, and I talked about that with Saul, but Ephesians 4:32, I think that we have to be willing to forgive one another, and I think that we have to understand that the call for us is unity, and that should be the overriding theme that we have, and something that we should all be working toward regardless of whatever situation we might find ourselves in. What else?
After the victory, that he is saying that no one is to be punished for questioning him. So now he's proven himself to the people, and they got behind him. So to keep unity, they're not going to be punished.
Yes. So we've mentioned there how he gives credit in chapter 11, verse 13, to God. And so I think that one of the great things about that is he actually is redirecting the people's attention to really, this is God's fight, this is God's will, and this is God that is fighting for us. And so I think when we think about just situations, again, that we might find ourselves in, oftentimes we make it personal, where it's like me versus you, when it should be us with God. And so we're going to strive for this unity, but we should be striving for unity in the sense of we are working to do the Lord's work. And that's what the focus needs to be, not on me getting what I want or you getting what you want. It should be God getting what He wants. And if we can keep that focus, especially in times of disagreement, then we're going to be able to keep from dividing. Sam?
I guess this ties back in with the humility that leaders should all have. It reminds me of, I guess, Moses as well. Like, you see that there's a clear distinction between how people who question Moses's authority and those who outright try to start some sort of coup, and how they're treated. Like Moses, got down and bowed down before people and made himself low in humility when they were accusing him of being, someone who tried to take control in a way that he shouldn't. But then God obviously punished and even killed those who rose up against his plan. And in this way, those who question Saul, he's fine with them, I guess, having these doubts, and that he can prove himself. And even, it's like what Todd was saying, if people question you, there might always be people who question you, but you want to make sure that it's their fault and not your own. And you can, live up the way that you're supposed to. And I just see that humility being expressed here, because they've already been delivered, is what Saul says in verse 13.
Yeah. And while question number 7 was because we're going through the process of appointing deacons, or question number 9 is not because I think we're having any kind of issues. I'm very, very thankful for the peace and the unity that we have at the congregation, but I think if we don't continue to talk about things that can and will happen, then we won't be prepared for those things. And so we all should be working to be unified, to be humble, and to be serving the Lord together. Thanks, everybody. We'll pick up with lesson 2 next week.